Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Artist Well. This is our 21st episode, and I'm delighted today to introduce a man who is an extraordinary man in the sense that he's very diverse in his artistic pursuits. And I'm also rather pleased because if some of you might remember a few weeks ago, my wife suggested, well, why not have a chef or a gardener? Because they're artists as well. I mean, some of them certainly are artists. And so we came up trumps with a gardener, but a gardener plus. And Gerry is a poet first and foremost and a writer, but he's also an environmentalist, he's an activist, and he's really quite an all-round man. So before I introduce Gerry, I just want to give you a bit of background to him. So Gerry is a poet and artist living on the Isle of Bute off the west of Scotland, who works primarily with subjects from the natural world, most specifically with plants, as well as the world of geopolitics. His work is found inscribed and created in public parks, botanic gardens, hospitals, and natural landscapes, as well as in galleries and, of course, on the page. He has been poet in residence at the Botanic Gardens of Glasgow and at Montpellier, France's oldest botanic gardens. He has also made work for Hidden Gardens, Glasgow, and Port Logan Botanic Gardens. He has been a recipient of a Robert Louis Stevenson Fellowship and a Creative Scotland Award, and was creative director of the Peace Garden. Walking informs the way he works and is sometimes the subject of his work. And he's going to talk about that at the very start. So Gerry, you're very welcome to the Artist Well. How's everything on the beautiful Isle of Bute?
It's just fine. Thank you, Alan. It's a pleasure to be here. And good morning, everyone. Just a brief note, rather perhaps on today of all days, coming up Trumps, I hope we come up Bidens. But that's a kind of personal thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, Gerry, we've a lot to get through.
Yeah.
But since we've never met and we've just had a brief conversation during the week, I obviously did a little bit of research of my own, and that, of course, started with social media. And I do recall looking at your profile on Facebook, and I was quite tickled when I went down and read when it came to education, because I would have felt that a man of letters like your good self, I'd be seeing went to Oxford, went to Cambridge, or something like that. But instead it says went to hell.
Yeah, I've I've been to Cambridge and Oxford, passing through. Passing through. The buses are very, very good in that part of the world.
Yeah.
I've also been to hell more times than I care to recount. And skipping over that part of my education, all culminated in my degree. Basically, is in philosophy.
Yes.
And I think that hell and Dante probably had equal parts in it.
Okay. And how did it influence your career? Because I know you did a fair bit of traveling, and I think I referred to you as a nomadic poet at one point.
Yeah, a lovely. I've also been referred to as a slow nomad, which is perhaps a little more accurate because I settle here and there. Well, okay, I guess I can safely say that my traveling was influenced by being in hell, if you like, in as much as almost anywhere is better than hell.
Indeed.
So you look around for better places to be in. And I found many places, I found many good places, and I eventually came to realize that everywhere is a good place. Everywhere is a good place. Place is where you are.
Yeah. And walking, it features a lot in a lot of your pursuits, doesn't it?
It does because, poetry, I make lots of things, I make gardens. I don't just sort of design them and have other people carry them out. I'm a hands-on sort of person. I get a great deal of pleasure from that. Also, I find it very difficult sometimes to delegate. It's hard to trust people with your own plants or your own planting orders. But, writing in a sense is a culmination of a life led rather than an intellectual exercise. And I've led a wandering life, almost like somebody who's going to come up a little bit later, perhaps, Wandering Angus in Yeats's poem there.
Yes. And I remember looking up that you were actually living on a boat for quite a while.
Indeed, yeah. Seemed like a good idea at the time, and it was a really wonderful idea. And many many pleasurable months and years were passed on that boat. Most particularly the very first winter we were there. The water froze. It was minus 20 degrees, and we went dancing on the ice. It was 2 feet thick. That was something very special.
Yeah. And then you found a disused church.
Yes, we did. And
it looks fantastic.
We've been looking around for some time for a place, a studio to rent. It proved to be impossible in the west of Scotland. People wanted colossal fees, and we discovered this church on Bute, and it was something we thought we should do. We knew people here, so we quite simply bought it. It's still in a state of refurbishment, if I can put it that way. The part we live in is absolutely perfect. The studio, which you'll see some pictures of, is our workspace. Myself and obviously my partner, Morven Gregor, who you can see there in one of those little pictures. Hello, Morven. So that's where we work, and that's how we work. And it appears to the outside eye perhaps to be slightly chaotic, or perhaps even entropic. I'm not really sure, but everything is ordered. We know where everything is, and everything is in a state of becoming within the studio.
Yes. Okay. All right. I think maybe it might be an idea to. Well, firstly, I think you're going to do a reading, are you?
Yes.
Before we look at the slides, because I think looking at the slides is going to help us go through the various aspects of your career. So it's probably a good thing to do that. But prior to that.
Well, yeah, I chose a reading from a book in which I have a couple of chapters called Walking Landscape and Environment. It's a weighty sort of, well, it is weighty, yeah. It's an academic sort of volume, and my pieces clearly are creative rather than academic. And my pieces are all about walking. And I thought it would be a good way to start, because walking will naturally feature later in this interview, this chat we're having. Yeah. So this is an extract from it, Walking In, and subtitle is 900 Questions Concerning Walking. It's quite clear, axiomatic almost, that to walk in different landscapes is to think different thoughts, and thus in different vocabularies, and thus also languages. Cornish or Cornosh is not the same as Hwyn or Furs or Gorse, nor yet the same as Ulex europaeus. On the strand, I have no or few names for the sea plants that I come across in their reds, ochres, browns, and livid greens. When walking, does one follow a train of thought, or a path, or a way? Or can it be both? Is it to follow one's nose or one's feet? Do we walk the same paths day after day, coming to know the hidden bends, the wayside dockens? Or are they paths of tradition, those of our forebears, the familiar headlands, Gallows Rock, the wee field known to grandparents as Johnny Mara's? Do we nod in recognition as we pass? Are we in place? So that's wherever I go, I'm asking questions. We have this inner monologue, which is defined by what we see, where we're walking. And if we're very lucky, the monologue stops and we just become the place we're in.
Yes. All right. Okay, Gerry, let's pull up the presentation and have a look at that.
Very, yeah. This is the boat we used to live on the canal, the Clyde, where it meets the sea. It's at the last lock in the series. It's the sea lock, and that's where we spent 8 or 9 very happy years.
Was it a cozy place?
Well, yes, yeah. I mean, the first winter we were there, I told you it was very cold, but Morven was cooking a clootie dumpling, and we had to open all the doors. I was the stoker of the big stove. We had to open the doors and windows to let the heat out.
Wow, yeah.
It was really cozy, yeah.
Okay. So we move from there to here.
There are stories behind this. As I said, I enjoy making things. This is our little hut, our cabin in the Campsies on the mainland, which we've had for many, many years. And that's me fixing the roof. Now, the reason I wanted this was not to demonstrate that I can climb a scaffold, but the roof was remade. It needed replacing. So I remade it with timbers which I had been given at Yorkshire Sculpture Park in place of me giving an artist talk. I saw them and I thought I'd far sooner have all of that wood than be paid some money, because you can't buy wood like this. It was a storm damaged tree, and I didn't know what I would use it for. I fell in love with the wood. I fall in love with all bits of wood and all seeds from trees.
Yes.
And so this was in storage for many years, and I suddenly realized, well, that's the new roof. We would be there because we have a garden there as well. It's really we started out gardening in a conventional way, and we soon realized that it was a kind of smorgasbord for the deer. So then we just developed it into a quite small orchard, which is what it is now.
Lovely. Okay.
Yeah, well, these are some shots of our working space, and I wanted there. I don't know if you can see the titles. It's a little bit blurry for me, but it doesn't matter.
I can see it. Okay.
Is it clear for everybody else? Fine. And this is, I think this is the B section of some poetry books, and they're sitting there. Among them all is a friend in Japan, a Japanese artist, Takaya Fuji, gave me a little brass Amida Buddha, who sits happily among the bees, obviously. More shots of where and how I work in this sort of clutter of books and bits and bobs. Moving on, you'll see.
You've plenty of space.
There is a lot of space, and you'll see that.
This doesn't really show it, but they are there,
yeah. There's more spacious shots, I think, coming up.
Okay.
If you keep going through.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the upstairs gallery of the church. I'm kind of slow in making bookshelves, but I know where every single book is.
Yes.
Thanks to Morven's cataloguing. I have a habit of putting a book down wherever I find it and flicking a page or two. But this is a good system because, you come across a lot of books that you didn't expect to this way. A lot of serendipity.
I'm sure, yeah. This gives a good...
This gives a much broader sweep of the body of the kirk, as is said in Scotland. And this is our grand set of table laid out for a specific event, which Morven particularly wanted to organize. It's a fundraiser for people were invited to a meal, Yes, we all had sort of Judy Chicago or something in mind, but an actual meal, a real meal. And it was a fundraiser for the Palestine Museum. When that very first year it started. It was short of funds, and it was put upon by the authorities, who actually didn't want Palestinian culture to be highlighted in any way whatsoever. So that's the church. That's the bit that's yet to be fully developed.
Sure.
It's our studio, and it's open to anything. This is the stairs up into the gallery. It shows the back wall. And if you look closely, you'll see that the ceiling of the church, there'll be a technical term, is it called nave or something like that? It resembles an upturned boat, which was one of the reasons we fell in love with the church.
Yes, it's difficult to see there, but I have seen another photograph of it, and it really is quite spectacular.
If you imagine a wooden boat turned upside down.
And in fairly good condition. I mean, did you have to do much repair when you bought it?
No, we were canny in that we knew it had been built in a quarry. So, on this rock built my church kind of thing. We knew it was sort of not going to subside or anything.
Yes.
And we had a structural engineer give it the once over, and he said, you've nothing to worry about.
Very good.
This is part of the garden outside, as I indicated. It's made in a quarry. The church is built in a quarry, and I'm trying to make a garden in the quarry, in the ex-quarry, which is one of the biggest gardening challenges of my life, because there is no topsoil. There is no soil in which to grow anything. Yeah. So the soil has to be made. It has to be got in from Ambrish Beg, which is another quarry which deals with topsoil. But everything has to be raised up. You can see in the background the first kind of terrace I built from stones from this and from another church, which was demolished down below us. So the garden is in a state of becoming just like the church. Everything is. And I'm beginning to plant things up. I think Yeah, those are runner beans, which we're eating today.
Oh, lovely, lovely. And they're sort of semi-raised beds, are they?
Everything is in a raised bed. It's
Yeah.
laid out, the whole garden is still happening, but it's laid out in the notion of an old sort of medieval parterre, herbs and plants in the shape of what you might imagine to be a parterre.
Sure. And that's the side of the church.
Yeah, it's the far side. It's the kind of utilities side, and that's a vine house, some log stores, and I've had to stop work recently because of weather and other things. That is the log store, as will be a much bigger, grander log store with bits salvaged. I salvage everything.
Yeah.
And there it is. There's a side door which leads to the old vestry.
Wonderful. And you can see the stone up here in the quarry. So it must be literally leaning against the side of it, is it?
You can walk back behind it. That's the back end of the church, so to speak.
Yes.
And you can walk all the way around it, but they only quarried as much stone as was needed. And this was the deal with the quarry owner of the time. They would quarry enough stone for the footprint of a church.
Yes. Yes.
And they took that very literally.
Very good.
It was the old Gallic church, and there's our boat, boats will feature in this quite a lot, and you can see inside that's our boat Finisterre, and imagine that magnified many, many, many times, turned upside down, and that's the roof of the church.
Ah, right, yes. Yes,
an active imagination for you all.
Yeah. Well, yeah. And there's relaxing after a day's work.
Yeah, relaxing after a day's work and enjoying the scent of the thyme beside me and that thing which does happen here now and then, a sunny day.
Now, this goes on to another area, which is the John Muir Way.
Yes. I wish I could remember things like years, but some years ago, the John Muir Way was inaugurated from, we were the inaugural walk. It runs from, it's named after John Muir, who you might know was the great sort of founder of many of the, notably Yosemite in the western seaboard of the States, founded national parks. He was an ecologist, he was a naturalist. And he grew up on the east coast of Scotland before he and his family emigrated to the United States. And so on some anniversary of his life, it was decided to build a walking path from coast to coast in Scotland. It goes through the heartland of Scotland, through industrial places which didn't exist when he was around. But takes in some fantastic woodlands. Now, on that walk from coast to coast, which took 9 days, Andrew Schelling, a poet from Colorado, but who knows John Muir's work and his ways very, very well, we both collected seeds to be planted along the way. John Muir himself was a great planter and lover of trees. And this was originally a notion put about by the Scottish artist, Alec Finlay, who commissioned myself and Andrew to walk the entire way. And we planted seeds and made some poems along the way, some of which I can read in a moment or two, perhaps.
Yes, please do.
But if you go to the next slide, you'll see us caught in the act of planting by the photographer, Hannah Devereux, who also accompanied us as to keep an archive of what we did and where we did it. So the person standing up is Andrew Schelling, who, as well as being one of the United States, if you haven't come across his work, you should look for his work. You will find it if you sort of Google. But he's also the United States of America's foremost Sanskrit scholar and translator. He has a wonderful take on what it is, what poetry should be, how it can be made through that lens, as well as his own lens of, I guess, a Western USA take on poetics.
Yes, yes.
It was a wonderful companion for the walk. And every night we stayed at a place, and for the first time in his life, Andrew discovered sticky toffee pudding. So we had to eat it at the end of every day. Sticky toffee pudding. I thought you mightn't stay in one place because they didn't have it on the menu.
Excellent. Now, at this point, would you like to do a reading?
Indeed.
Or am I missing another slide? Is there another slide?
No, I think we move on after that to
I think so,
different project altogether.
Yeah.
So this is from a book of mine. Sure. It's called Night Exposures. I can never tell if you're seeing that the right way around, because I'm seeing it back to front.
Yeah, it's fine, Gerry.
There's a section in it which charts in my poetry. Andrew has his own elsewhere, which I made every day. I struggled to make a poem simply because I wanted to. It was something I can do, walking thoughts into your mind when I'm walking. And I restricted myself to 8 lines because I could remember 8 lines. Anything longer and it just passes, straight through my head. So this is called On Being in Place, On Being in a Place. It's a 9-day walk across Scotland. That's how long it took us. And the title of each poem is our starting point for the day. Heatherwick. We could have planted an oar here, but we stitched the land, a palimpsest, an ecology of utterance, place of heather. Houston Mill. A broken willow branch, and her blue eyes walk with us. Our time collapsed, our vanities the way, a route from here to there. Craigmore. Visions of a land denuded of history, leaving only parted lips, a gone song for miners, for shepherds, pollen for bees. Craig's Wood. What's the manifest of timber? Leaves and light. What's manifest in timber? Crock and book and cradle, cradle. Pefferbank. Perhaps in irony, honesty seeds itself at the gate of the big house. And I'll stop after this one. Northwoods. This is the way of it. War after war. Deer Scott, northern woods grow slowly round concrete coastal defense blocks.
Good. And that's a sort of a memoir almost of your trip.
Yeah, it's a record for me and for anybody who might know those places. They're all obviously very real places. We traveled from east to west.
Yeah.
Because I like following the sun, the direction of the sun.
Yes.
And John Muir would never have left from the east coast. It was impossible. He left Scotland on the west coast. Nobody's really sure where he set out from.
Oh, okay. All right, now we move to a different subject.
Yes, on my walks, I made many walks. You mentioned me as an activist. I'm an anti-war activist. Yeah, just down the road here is Fastlane, home to the weapons of mass destruction of the United Kingdom government. It's a nuclear submarine base. Now, whatever you think about that, they are weapons of mass destruction. And they are many, 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 many times more powerful than the atomic bombs which were dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So one of my walks, actually, they all kind of telescope into each other. The first walks I made were in the US deserts to see the places where bombs were first tested, atomic bombs in that instance in 1945. Immediately prior, they were tested in the desert, particularly in a place called, in the Nevada desert, but also in a place called Trinity. I wrote a very strange book about that affair. I went from the deserts, and wandering about in the deserts, which was a very difficult task. There's a lot of very strange stories about that, but I guess this isn't the place to tell you some of my overnight stops.
No, I think you should. I think you should.
Okay,
because they were quite surprising.
Yeah, well, in Nevada in particular, I inadvertently one night in the town closest to Death Valley found myself wandering. I'd been walking all day long, and I found a place where I could have a beer, which was very, very welcome after a lot of water. You need to drink a lot of water in the desert, more than you can carry. And I was knocking it back, the way one does, and I noticed that there were very many items of ladies' underwear, to be slightly prim about it, or brassiers tacked to the ceiling. And I kind of looked up and I looked down again, and I gestured to the barman and said, "What's all that about?" And he said, "What do you mean, what's that about?" And we had this sort of strange conversation, and it turned out that where I was staying for the night, and the bar within it, was actually one of Nevada's legal brothels. I stayed in others also, unbeknown to me, they were brothels, but they seem to be good places to stay, as long as you want to stay for more than an hour.
Did you get much sleep, no?
I'll pass on that question. I'm not going to answer that.
Okay.
That's an Alan Kane leading question.
It is, of course.
Yeah. I suppose the answer is, the honest and short answer is no, I didn't. But, I was rested and I got on the next day. So after the deserts, I went walking with a couple of introductions in the places where those bombs were finally dropped in August the 6th and the 9th, 1945, in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And in both the desert spaces and in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, I spoke to survivors in the States, it was survivors of fallout. In Hiroshima and Nagasaki and the surrounding places, it was sometimes through translator and interpreter, direct survivors, hibakusha, of those bomb blasts.
Yes. And
thinking about it, it breaks my heart year on year, time after time.
Yes.
In Nagasaki, I met Dr. Abinuma, who himself was born slightly after the bomb was dropped. And he told me stories of wandering the hills because Nagasaki was totally destroyed, totally uninhabitable for the most part. And he wandered the hills with his family with nothing to eat except the apples they could find. But he went on to become a renowned, one of Japan's renowned tree surgeons. And he had discovered two surviving trees of persimmon. And he saved the seeds from the persimmon. And together with an artist, Tatsuo Miyajima, he grew on these into little saplings. They are the second generation of the survivors of a kaki tree. You can see there the botanical name, Diospyros kaki. We call them persimmons, and the Japanese call them kaki. He gave me a tree. He gave me two trees actually to bring back to Scotland because I pestered him so much. We eventually got one. That is the tree.
That's the tree, yes.
It was eventually planted after a lot of trials and tribulations in getting it through phytosanitary situations, through customs. And I actually had to bring it, the last leg of the journey, I brought it on a sleeper train from London. It had the upper bunk all the way to Glasgow. It requested that bunk. And it's planted now happily and has grown for quite some time in the Botanic Gardens in Glasgow, where it has proper people to tend it and look after it. It fruited the first year. It hasn't since because it's still struggling to get to grips with Scotland's climate. And the two stones preceding it were a two-word little poem, which I made, Flames, Flower, which seemed pertinent, which has also been translated happily into sort of into a very good sounding Japanese poem.
Really, yes. And were there two trees involved in the beginning?
Yes, there were two trees. The first tree was planted amid much ceremony and pomp with hundreds and hundreds of people there, dignitaries, you know, the Japanese consul, the Lord Provost, which is kind of like a mayor of Glasgow, people from the Japanese community in Scotland, school children from all kinds of schools, songs, poems, dances, celebrations, music. We all had tea. And although with a silver spade, the Lord Provost firmly believes he did the planting of it, it was one charming and lovely little girl who actually did it, who did the planting.
Yeah.
A couple of weeks after that happened, or I can't remember the timescale anymore, but not long after it, we discovered that tree had simply been stolen, which is a very strange thing. I like to think of it growing its own way in somebody else's perhaps suburban garden or something, and maybe even, I don't know, giving pleasure and fruit to somebody else. But they didn't know that I'd been growing a separate tree all along in a secret place.
Yes.
And it stayed secret. We replaced it with an ordinary persimmon tree, not a Nagasaki persimmon. We replaced it to begin with so that nobody would notice the gap. And then we replaced it with the real tree once it had grown on big enough to be planted out in the original spot. So yeah, everything has a story, doesn't it?
Bizarre, isn't it? Yes. Very bizarre.
So that's the story of the khaki tree.
Yes. Very good. Lovely story.
So
You're beside a very, very large oak.
Yes.
Yeah. What's the story behind that?
Yeah, well, that's the story behind another book of mine. That's the Glenburn oak, and it's a photograph taken by Morven, and it is the back cover of my book, An Oakwoods Almanac. I was given an award, the Creative Scotland Award you mentioned earlier, to go to study the Ardnamurchan, which is the West Coast oakwoods. Essentially, it's a temperate rainforest along the west coast of Scotland with remnant oak trees and everything that grows with those. An enormously diverse biosphere, you could almost call it, with lichens, mosses, and of course it's not just oaks, but also people live there. I was there for 18 months, living in a converted byre. Charlie the top, the ram, fondly imagined it was his and tried to get in every time I left the door open, but we managed to shoo him out all the time.
Yes.
And I was the notion was to write a series of poems. It was quite simple. I'm a poet. That's the kind of thing I do. And I'd been there a year, and I suddenly realized I haven't been able to write anything. I've been enjoying myself too much. Every day I walked in the woods, made notes, but nothing really came of it. You know, you can't force things. And I realized at that point that the notes I had made were all they were viable. It became a prose book, an almanac, I call it, you know, because it contains notes, jottings, observations, and some poems.
Would you like to read something from that?
Yeah, I called it an Oakwoods Almanac after, you know, like the almanacs that one sees across the world.
Yeah.
The other part of the story there is I went to finish the book I was given another award to go to Finland to finish the book. When I reached Finland, a particular place near on the southwest coast, a place called Myynämäki, I discovered the remnants of an oakwood, which is unbelievably rare for Finland because they're all conifers. Their natural woods are conifers. So I began to explore that and examine some other islands like Inia, which was the King of Sweden's preserve at one point, to build from the oaks which grew there then and still grow there, his warships. So there were lots of connections to be made. I'll read one small passage from the Ardnamurchan bit, and then perhaps I continued writing. Rather than writing up my notes, I wrote all about the Finnish Oakwoods as well. So it's a book of two halves called An Oakwoods Almanac. And there's the photograph of the back of the book. So I found myself, walking about all hours of the day and night, and the book has a lot to do with human ecology as well as ecology, because it's a lived. The Sunad Oakwoods they're a lived place, sparsely populated, but a lived place, and have been for generations, and have been exploited by humans, but conserved by humans because of that exploitation. They needed to make a sustainable place to live. So this was written round about this time, November the 3rd, actually. It's the old way, still the way of most of the world, but it's become remote, and we try to banish it, to walk unaided by light in darkness. How apart and rare. Now, 10 days after full moon, 4 until a new moon. No house lights east or west, a little dim starlight as the west wind frays the lumbering mass of greyed cloud. To slowly feel the way with cautious feet, to feel alone in silence, to feel cold in dim mountain bulk, the absence of complication, world reduced to the slow and slowing, unseen but present. Like the presence of the liver and spleen in the body, unfelt but known of. Stags in the dark, birds roosted, one step and another.
Beautiful, Gerry. Yeah, beautiful.
And from Finland, a place which I loved and got to know reasonably well, although I have very little of the language. Indeed, when I went shopping for the first time, people asked me where I bought the wine and cheese. And I said, oh, it was in Myrnamäki, where we were bussed, once a week. And they said, yes, but where? And I said, well, in Tervetuloa. And they looked at me, being Finnish, and they burst out laughing. Yeah. They said, really? That's very interesting. Tervetuloa means welcome, and it's above shops in Finland. So I didn't know that. Here's an encounter. This is called conversation. I'm standing with my hands in my pockets by the side of the road. I'm contemplating the stones beneath the oaks. They're not small, but each may be the size of a kitchen chair and have been dropped off here from the front loader of a tractor at some time, I'm guessing. There's an odd thing here with age. These oaks have been here a long time, from the girth of the largest I've seen, 250 years at a guess. Who knows what generations preceded them? I'll try to find out the history of this little wood as I can, but for now, I'm thinking at least 250 years per generation. They're growing on thin, sandy soil. Bedrock emerges here and there, covered with plumages of lichen and short mosses. The oaks have an intimate relation with the rock and the soil. The new kitchen chair rocks are just as old as the bedrock. They were perhaps left behind in Myrnamäki by retreating glacier. Rubble, but the stuff of geology. I'm wondering how long it'll take the oakwood to assimilate these stones, for them to weather and leach and to grow into one another in that intricate way minerals and trees have with each other. It's not Pentti Saarikoski, long dead, but he certainly looks like a photograph I've seen of him, with a full beard and long flying 1970s hair. He cycles a little past. I think his brakes need attention. Then halts and turns his bike and himself round and comes to stand beside me, facing the same direction. He speaks in Finnish, but when I apologize in English for not understanding the language, he attempts English. I'm guessing he's about my age. His bike is old, his clothes denim and well worn. Worldwide America sits on his head in the shape of a baseball hat. His clear eyes regard me with some curiosity, and he makes his thoughts plain in one word and a grand gesture in the direction of where I had been looking. What? I shrug. How to tell him I'm thinking of the interdependence of mineral and plant? I say one of my 3 Finnish words, tammi, oak. His eyes wrinkle around the edges. Ah, he says, sighing, and I warm to a man who can take that as full explanation. He speaks again in Finnish and indicates the cloth bag on his handlebars. For a moment, I think he might bring out anything: mushrooms, glittering mica, an ammonite, a seahorse. It's vodka, the cheapest available from Alko, the state monopoly drink in town. Leijona brand at €13.25 a bottle. I know this because not 2 hours ago, I bought a bottle. Twisting the screw top with a crack, he offers me the bottle, and it's then I say my second Finnish word. Kiipis. Cheers. His blue eyes wrinkle again. He smiles as I swig and hand it back. He swigs, and we together contemplate oak. Another swig each, and the bottle goes back into the bag. He cycled a round trip of 24 kilometers for that bottle. He remounts his bike and points it towards the west again, and my third Finnish word comes out as he cycles off. Kiitos. Thanks. His smile again, and I have no need to understand the words of his reply as he waves his arm up and back. It's a gesture that takes in oak, minerals, age, kitchen chairs, and humanity.
Fabulous. I love that.
He was a lovely man. The person mentioned there, he was a spitting image of the great Finnish poet Pentti Saarikoski. Yes, well, these are hazels. This was an exhibition of mine and Morvan Gregor's. We worked together very, very frequently, and this was in Edinburgh, and it celebrates a lot of things. We brought trees, among other things, into the gallery. It's a thing which I enjoy doing. I enjoy confounding people's notions of what art might be. In the background, you see a neon work of mine, but the foreground, those are all hazels. And I grew them from seed. Everywhere I go, I collect seeds. I don't know what will become of them. I planted these up. These are Ardnamurchan Soonert, West Coast Scotland, hazels planted from seeds by me. And I discovered this use for them. They're not in leaf yet because it was the wrong time of year for the exhibition. And that part of the exhibition was named from a phrase by Yeats, W.B. Yeats, from his the song of the Wandering Angus. I went out to the hazelwood because there was a fire in my head, and it just struck a chord, so I named that. The show was in part with Tim Collins and Reiko Goto, who telling stories through the medium of their art of the Blackwoods of Caledon, which is another kind of rare habitat for Scotland. So, you know, the seeds from Ardnamurchan many years prior to that formed part of an exhibition by Morvan and myself. And now those very same hazels that you see there, grown on after another few years, form a hazel hedge in the current garden here on Bute. I hope we get nuts from them one day.
Yes, yes. Okay, so now we move to the sanctuary in Finland, yeah?
Yeah, moving backwards and forwards in places. I was after the residency, I wanted something to pay back the extraordinary kindness I was shown in Finland, in a place called, in particular, in an artist residency at a place called Sari Manor. It was old enough, and probably it was originally owned by a sort of amateur scientist of the day who knew Linnaeus and corresponded with him a lot. It became latterly it's. So to cut a long story short, it's a very long story, but we decided that a good way to repay was to make a permanent work of art there, to repay in some way, to make a small gesture of thanks towards my hosts. And this is a circle of spruce trees. I always use natives. It's native to Finland. It will, in time, you'll see in the next slide, not for a moment, but you'll see in the next slide how much it's grown. That's over the years. But to revert to the previous slide, this was when it was first planted. And the notion of it, there is a stone which breaches the circle of larches, inscribed Sanctum Sanctorum, because Latin was the first language spoken in Sari, apart from Swedish. It's the scientific language and continues to be part of the scientific language wide world. And it means, those of you who know any Latin will recognize that it's the Holy of Holies. As it grows, this will exclude all humans. It will become thick and prickly, and only birds and burrowing animals will be able to get into it. And if you see the next, if you see the next slide, after, let me think, I think it grows at about 50 centimeters a year, that particular spruce. Yeah. And that's a Finnish friend of mine, the artist Hannele Rantele, who posed somewhat like, I don't know, Gandalf or somebody without the beard in front of these, in front of the trees, just to give a sense of scale after the years. And you can see that she would have to force her way into that.
Completely.
The notion is when it grows, it's about 20 meters across. So there's plenty of room for nesting birds. It's built on the edge of wetlands on the coast, the Gulf of Bothnia, and many birds overwinter there, and it's on a migratory route as well. So there will be plenty of birds nesting in it, I know already. There will also be all kinds of little small mammals and invertebrates in there, and they are the true inhabitants. I wanted to make something for them. I wanted to, in some way, say thanks to them, because they've been my companions all through my life, trees and creatures. But something that kept those pesky humans out. Yeah,
and it certainly does that,
It does that. You get very prickled if you try to go through that. But that was, I'd also like to touch on the notion that I'm very fond of collaborating. I collaborate with people whenever I have the opportunity. And that is a collaboration, not just with the gardeners and with the very wonderful stonemason who carved the letters for me in the stone, a wild stone like those kitchen chair side boulders chosen on site there in Sari. But the gardeners who helped with the planting and who have maintained and looked after the trees in all the interim years. It's a continuing collaboration. And the lovely thought is that there will be collaborators somehow of mine in memory when I'm long gone from the scene. So it continues. And the following slide, this is much closer to home. It's, as you know, I live on a little island just across on the mainland. A place called Kulrua, which is also coincidentally a sculpture park. And I proposed, and they were delighted to have a permanent artwork there in the sculpture park of another sanctuary, which is built in a place, as you can see, of great rocks. I chose for this one, when it's fully grown, it will exclude all humans. It's planted up in an elliptical planting because of the nature of the site between the rocks and the sea. It's planted up with seriously prickly Juniperus communis, the common juniper, which is native to these parts in Argyll. And again, I just wanted to show the people that I collaborate with, the gardeners, the masons, the people who drive the tractors to lift heavy stones, all of these people, and as well as the plants themselves, who are true collaborators in the projects like this. So this is also called Sanctuary, and it also excludes human beings when it's fully grown. There will be different kind of birds and different kinds of mammals growing in it, and you can see the process as it's happening. That's me in the red plaid shirt, by the way. As I said, I find it hard to delegate. So the guy leaning on the shovel has been told to stand aside while I got on with it. Lovely. And if you move along the next slide, you'll see more of it. That's myself and the mason lifting a base stone in place. Those stones are fierce heavy.
Hey, look at
That they are, believe me. There's one
Yeah.
outside my house right at the moment, and I haven't had the strength to move it, nor will I. It's going to take at least 2 or 3 people.
Yeah.
So that's the base stone for the inscribed stone, which I think is shown in the next slide.
Yes.
I don't know how clear that is.
It's fairly clear to me. Yeah.
But again, there's a story behind everything. I chose a slate like the one you saw as the bedstone from this place. But it fractured on inscription, so we couldn't use it. So this is a stone from a farm on Bute, which was salvaged. I love salvaged things, and I cannot for the life of me remember the very, very famous billiards player who had this as part of his. It's the base slate of a billiards table.
Oh yes, yeah.
We took just one part, polished it up, inscribed it, and had it painted, the inscription painted, and it's in Gaelic, Scots Gaelic, and it refers to the place. Cool is a Gaelic word meaning narrows, because the waters from the mainland to Bute are known as the Kyles in English, and Cool.
Yes, yes.
And this is so the birds can land on it and inch their way in. This is the Narrows home, the narrow straight home, it translates as roughly. Yeah. But it was important to have it in Gaelic because that was the original language, like spoken here, like the Latin scientific language of Mernemäki and Sari in Finland. So there are correlations there. Again, native planting, seeds collected, and just that thing of being in place all the time. I mentioned earlier, anywhere is better than hell. And goodness me, I've come to rest in the most wonderful place. It's part of the sort of Dalriadic kingdom, as was. And it suits me perfectly to be wet half the year.
Yes.
Because of the climate.
Sure, yeah.
Another thing that we did for Coolrua, Morven and myself, and you'll see Morven. Can I use the vernacular here?
Yes.
She's on the coastline on a very, very cold, blustery day, in a wetsuit, but she's freezing her arse off. So you'll see her now. A very short clip.
No.
So over the titles there, I'm aware of time passing as well. What is the Red Boat was our show. Obviously, as a poet, I'm always looking for the things that happen between the words and the things that happen between the letters, which is a kind of silence. And it doesn't get much more silent than semaphoring part of a poem, ably acted out there by Morven. It's also a reference to, the Red Boat is a reference to the big boats, and Rua, as I'm sure you know, is red in Gaelic. But also you saw how narrow it was. It's very deep there. And between where she was on the island and the mainland in the background, it's a passage of surprisingly large boats, and all around these waters are tankers, as I mentioned before, navy boats, submarines, and so on. And their principal means of communication, like the Gaelic, like the Latin, was once upon a time in semaphore. So it's a reference to all of those things, and that's why. And I just, I wanted it there to illustrate that Morten and I work together. It's one of our other kinds of collaborations, but also it's a search for what words can't give, what the words in poetry can't give, but what the silences between the words in poetry might give. So it's, without being too po-faced about it, it's kind of allegorical.
Yes.
I want to give thanks to this. This is my latest book. And you had on the show a couple of weeks ago, I think, Autumn Richardson.
That's right.
Part of the publishers, part of the another great team, herself and Richard Skelton, who published this book of mine. This book, somebody told me when I started out as a poet, if you can't write poetry, attempt some translation. And I thought, well, that's a bit beyond me. I can barely speak my own language, never mind anybody else's. That was in the early 70s. I discovered, living in Kerry at the time, I discovered Ogham stones. And they've been a fascination of mine, and the inscriptions on them ever since 1974. This is not all the inscriptions. I'm at work on more, but it's a very good proportion of them. And this is the most wonderful book. Not in terms of the words, perhaps, but in terms of the presentation. It has the original Ogham inscriptions and the poems I made from those Ogham inscriptions. Autumn and Richard have my everlasting gratitude for putting it out in this format under their imprint. They refer a lot to trees in the Oghams. Skin silver birch, rowan of pillage, heather the udder brusher, poplar the horse trembler, oak of hill and adze, answer song. This is from Inchaira, north of us here. Begin with honey and fellowship of trees, 1/3 of a spear and a shroud. Return, salmon, return, sun, return, spring well, bees are dying. And to conclude, this is from from somewhere in County Cork. In Cork University itself, they have a whole collection of Ogham stones brought into a cloister like eternal monks watching over the cloisters. This is from a place called Knockshannowy. How they all root hum through hazel, fair sweet friends of nutshells. The ash, which yellowing is also become gorse, smooth horse stabber, guerrilla gear and skill, spewing flame herbs and herb flame, kai food, kai friend flame, parasite eyebright or drip of honey from corpse gob, sallow and quicken and you and you. So that's a flavor of the Ogham transcriptions. Yeah. Somebody in the States has called it a series of co-creations rather than translations. Particularly to you, Alan, thank you so much for the invitation. Thank you, Autumn, for kind of prompting that invitation. I know it was through you that Alan heard of me. And just to all the people there whom I know, particularly to Morven, to Beth, to Richard, whose face I've not seen in a little icon this morning, but also to everybody, thank you for tuning in. Thank you particularly for actually paying attention. It's a rare thing to have people, not to me, but for us to pay attention to each other in one place. Well, not in one place, clearly now, but at one time. It's just an astonishing feat of community. A hugely overused word, but that's what it is. So thank you all. Thank you so much.
Gerry, thank you, and thank you also for mentioning Autumn and Richard, because I was going to do that, but you've done it for me, because they were absolutely instrumental in the two of us meeting up and getting to know each other. So thank you for that. It was an absolute pleasure listening to you. I mean, it's really a gift, and we're very honoured to have been given your time to that end, and also for Morgan for her help in putting the presentation together. And all of that. So thank you both very much. And thank you all for watching, and especially those who got up at some ridiculous hour of the morning. We're very grateful. And to those who will be seeing this after the event on our YouTube channel, if you've enjoyed it, please give it a like and subscribe, because the more people who subscribe, the more enjoyable it's going to be for both the people who are being featured and also you, the viewer. So thank you all. Gerry, thank you so much again. And I look forward to seeing you next Saturday. Bye-bye now.